What would you do if you discovered that your Formula One car had been defective for several races and that every corner, every braking, every maneuver at the limit was being sabotaged without anyone knowing? That is exactly what Oscar Piastri just experienced, and McLaren is in shock. Tension peaked during Saturday's sprint. In the middle of Turn 3, one of the most technical and fastest points on the Interlagos track, Piastri lost control of the MCL39 when hitting a wet curb. The impact against the barriers was inevitable. The car was destroyed on the right side, and the Australian emerged unharmed but visibly frustrated. It wasn't his first mistake of the year, but this time something was different. The team, even without having all the information, began to suspect that it was not simply a human error. That night, McLaren made a decision that would completely change its interpretation of Piastri's performance in recent races, completely dismantle the crashed unit and subject it to a very high-level technical inspection. What they discovered was disconcerting. At the heart of the rear suspension system, a critical component known as the pressure valve system hydraulic actuator had a microfracture. A crack so small that not even standard sensors had detected it. But its effect, under certain load and pressure conditions, was devastating. During hard braking, especially in areas of high lateral mass transfer, the pressure within the system dropped minimally, delaying the response of the rear axle for fractions of a second. To any fan, that may seem insignificant. But for a Formula One driver who moves in a world where thousands define races, that delay changes everything. Every time Piastri pushed the car in a fast corner, every time he needed immediate response from the rear axle, what he got was uncertainty. It was like running to the edge of a cliff without knowing if the ground would remain firm under your feet. And the most alarming thing is that this was not a new bug. Reviewing data from previous races, engineers began to see a pattern. A subtle but consistent decrease in the rear stability of the car. Always present, always ignored, because it always seemed to be within the norm. That night, in the McLaren pit, there was no technical euphoria, no shouts of victory, nor consolation. Only silence, analysis, and a shared feeling of guilt. They had let one of their drivers fight with a broken car. They had misinterpreted the signs. And now they knew it. When we talk about a modern Formula One car, we usually think about power, aerodynamics, cutting-edge technology. But what very few consider is the fragility that exists behind that image of perfection. McLaren's MCL39, apparently one of the most advanced cars on the grid, hit a problem that not even its own engineers were able to identify in time. A silent defect, deeply rooted for months, that ended up betraying Oscar Piastri at the most critical moment of the season. And then came other errors. This time not from Oscar but from the team. Seeking to maximize performance on circuits with specific characteristics such as Austin and Mexico, McLaren introduced a series of adjustments to the configuration of the MCL39. Adaptations designed for surfaces with low grip, high temperatures, and abrasive asphalts. More permissive, looser settings that would allow the car to slide under control without penalizing wear too much. Technically, it made sense. But in Piastri's car, already compromised by the structural imbalance inherited from Baku, these configurations became a multiplier of the problem. What should have given him an advantage weakened him. The car became harder to read, more unpredictable. And the worst thing is that the specific conditions of each route masked the symptoms. Only at Interlagos, with its treacherous geography, blind curves, elevation changes, and aggressive compression zones, was the true extent of the problem revealed. The MCL39 was fragmented at its core, and Piastri was driving a machine that no longer spoke his language. But that was not all. McLaren faced an additional dilemma that would end up further conditioning its performance. During practice in Brazil, sensors detected abnormal wear on the underside of the car, especially on the flat bottom. Faced with the threat of being penalized for exceeding the regulatory wear limits, they made a defensive decision: raise the car's rake. That is, slightly increase the inclination of the car to reduce contact with the ground. It was a technically prudent move, but it came at a price. By raising the rake, the car lost rear downforce and, with it, stability in fast corners. Just what Piastri's car could least afford at that time. Thus, without knowing it, McLaren ended up amplifying the consequences of a defect that had been brewing for months. In a sport where every detail counts, the MCL39 became a paradox. An elite car betrayed by a sum of microscopic imperfections. And the most painful thing for both Oscar and McLaren is that this betrayal was not evident until it was too late. The McLaren garage, usually a hive of frenetic activity, seemed like a different place the night after the sprint at Interlagos. There were no technical instructions nor the metallic sound of incessant work on the cars. There was only an awkward, almost clinical silence. The telemetry monitors were still on, but no one was looking urgently anymore. What they had just discovered shook the team's foundations. Morale, which had been solid after a dominant start to the season, plummeted. The words of Andrea Stella, team director, resonated in a serious but measured tone. This cannot happen again. He was not referring to the Piastri accident. He wasn't talking about the spin or the result on the table. He was referring to the silent betrayal of the car, to the failure that they did not know how to see, to the chain of events that the team allowed to grow under their supervision. Because in Formula One, when a driver loses confidence, the problem is rarely just psychological. The discovery of microfracture in the hydraulic system was more than a technical revelation. It was a reality check. McLaren, the team that had won the Constructors' title in 2024 and had started 2025 with an aggressively evolved car, had let a critical defect slip through several races. And not only that, he had misinterpreted it. They had adjusted settings to suit different circuits without realizing that, in Piastri's case, those decisions were fuel for a silent fire. But the blow was not only technical. It was human. Because Piastri had been competing at a disadvantage. He had been exposed to maneuvers at the limit with a car that did not respond as it should. He had blamed himself for mistakes that they now knew were not his. The pressure, the criticism in the media, the comparisons with Norris, he had faced all of this with an incomplete tool. And that, for a team that boasts of operating to the millimeter, was an unforgivable mistake. McLaren's response was quick and profound. They redesigned post-race inspection protocols to include new layers of analysis on hydraulic components and structural symmetry sensors. They implemented an advanced correlation system that will compare dynamic data from each pilot in real time with a base profile of ideal performance. And for the first time in years, they publicly accepted that the error was not the pilot's, but theirs. Internally, a complete technical review of Piastri's car was called, part by part. From the suspension anchor points, to the interaction between the braking system and the weight change when cornering. The possibility of introducing a completely new chassis for the following races was even raised, if the data showed that the imbalance was irreparable without structural redesign. But not everything could be corrected in the workshop. The damage to Oscar's confidence cannot be repaired with new parts. McLaren knew it. For this reason, in a closed-door meeting, the entire team, from mechanics to simulation engineers, attended an internal session where everything that happened since Baku was reviewed, crudely but honestly. It was not an accountability. It was a way to recover something more valuable, mutual trust. That day, McLaren learned that excellence is not just about speed or technical innovation. It's also about taking care of those behind the wheel. Because you can have the best car, the best tools, the most brilliant engineers, but if you fail to protect the integrity of your own drivers, everything else loses value. And although Brazil was a technical, sporting, and emotional defeat, for McLaren it was also a turning point. A brutal wake-up call that forced the team to look inward, recognize their mistakes, and commit to something bigger than victory, the integrity of their project. What happened with Oscar Piastri in Brazil was not just a footnote in a McLaren technical report. It was a deep wound in the relationship between team and driver, a crack that does not appear in the timetables or in the championship rankings. It was a warning to everyone in the paddock. Even the most advanced teams can miss the essentials. And in Formula One, ignoring the essentials pays a high price. Because here it's not just about winning or losing races. It's about knowing what conditions you are competing under. It's about not running blindly. Not to justify an unstable car by saying that it is the racer's driving style. What Piastri experienced reminds us that even at the highest level, an imperceptible mistake can cost more than a championship. It can cost you the credibility, the trust, the morale of an entire team. Leave it in the comments what you think about all this.